All right, welcome to the October 24th Dev Call. Dan is out this week on a rare and well-earned vacation, so it's just going to be me running this today with a bunch of folks from the team. We are going to use the same structure that we used last time to go through the priorities in order of how we're thinking about them. And the main items on the agenda are one, growth. So we're going to talk a little bit about channels, feeds, transactions, how we're thinking about all of that. Direct casts, there are some new updates on read APIs for developers, and then some of the things we're doing around spam and continuing to reduce signup costs. Item four is talking about hubs, particularly there's some bug fixes, some new features, but the big item for today is maybe the Snapchain design doc and collecting feedback on that. And then item five, which is sign in with Farcaster, sort of been on pause for the last 2 weeks since the team has been pretty busy with items one through four. All right, diving into growth. So channels, we've launched a bunch of new stuff over the last 2 weeks. We're giving things this week and next week to settle. And the main focus right now is collecting user feedback. So one of the things we're doing is trying to talk to all the different types of channels that are emerging. So we have community channels like Base and Super Rare and Zora that are like a product or a community trying to build something around there. We have more topic-based channels like books or photography and things like that, which are more around like bringing people with shared interests together. And then there's a whole bunch of longer tail channels like token channels and other things, which are also super interesting. And so we're going to talk to all three groups, collect lots of feedback, do lots of user interviews, and try to understand what's working and what's not working for each group. And then based on that, we will probably, there's three priorities, but the way we're going to sequence them depends on what we hear from those groups of people. And the three priorities would be better onboarding, so you can actually bring people and drop them straight into your channel and give them a better experience. Better request flow, so when people want to join your channel, there's an easier way for them to join, whether it's using third-party plugins or being able to do it through DCs. And of course, decentralization of channels and what the right setup is to actually make that on-chain so that it's actually easy for people to use. So to reiterate, no, we're not going to ship anything major this week or next week. We're mostly going to be in research and understanding mode. So again, if you have feedback, please tag Dan or myself, and we will reach out to you. We'll also be reaching out to a bunch of channel owners directly to collect feedback. Cool. Any questions on that before I move on? All right. The major other item that the team is focused on, so about three people on the team are rotated onto this week, is improving the relevance of feeds. So one of the things we are running a bunch of experiments on is how do we take the home feed and actually make sure that it is surfacing the most interesting content to you. And the loud and clear feedback we hear from folks is, I'm not seeing some of the people I want to see or some of the people that I follow as often as I want. And so we're going to be running a bunch of experiments to see how can we dial that up and actually get better balance between showing you the people you follow, but also surfacing some new interesting stuff on the feed, like boosted posts and things like that. So we'll announce those experiments every day. I announced a couple yesterday. We'll announce a couple more today and tomorrow. And again, feedback is super helpful if you see something that you like or that you don't like on the feed. Third item up is talking about transactions. So one of the other things that the developer team, Horsefax and Tony are thinking about right now is how we make it easier and easier to use to do on-chain stuff right from your Farcaster apps like Warpcast. So the first thing is we've launched mini app transactions. Horsefax will probably actually drop the docs for that in this in the chat and then post it online. But it's now possible when you invoke a mini app to actually request a transaction, have that come back to Warpcast and be executed through Rainbow or Coinbase through mobile wallet protocol. So this is kind of like a new experiment we're trying to see. Are mini apps like a really interesting form factor to execute transactions? The documentation is still a little early stages and rough around the edges, but if this works, we will clean all of this up and make this polished and really double down on this. The other main thing that's taking up a lot of cycles right now is we're thinking through what is the right approach to have usable wallets in all Farcaster apps. So is there a common pattern that Supercast and Warpcast and others can actually use to have on-chain transactions? And our POV on this is as follows. One is, I think, external wallets will always be problematic on mobile because if you are a new user and you come and you start using Warpcast, and then the user experience to do something interesting is go download this other wallet, set up your seed phrase and use it, or connect to this thing on desktop, the honest answer is that's just going to suck for a whole bunch of new users. And the ideal experience that we want is, hey, you started on Warpcast. Here's a wallet. We've set it up for you. Here's a one-click way to fund your wallet using some other mechanism where you can actually move money into this wallet and start doing stuff. And here's a one-click button that you can just tap within the feed, get a confirmation, and execute whatever you want, no matter where you are. That is, I think, the ideal experience, not just for Farcaster apps, but for any apps in crypto. And we're thinking through how do we actually implement this in a way that is secure and usable. And what I mean by that is um, embedded wallets are cool. Privy and a bunch of other apps have been doing them for a while. The challenge is, let's say you get a bunch of assets in that wallet. There's no wallet-like interface for you to go and actually use them like a full-blown actual wallet. And so, again, ideal experience here would be you have an embedded wallet that you can use in your app, but there's actually a way to go and link it to your Coinbase, Rainbow, MetaMask, or other wallet and actually use it as a real wallet. So when you're in the app, you're using it in the context of the app doing lightweight transactions. When you're in the wallet, you can actually get the full blown, like true wallet functionality, and you should be able to use your wallet in both modalities. And I think the smart contract standards, we're getting really close, and it's like either now or in the next 2 to 3 months, it's probably going to be possible to build something like this with a great user experience, with recovery, with passkeys, so that all of your stuff never gets lost. And we're trying to see if we can make a sprint to push on this now. So Horsefax is leading the effort on thinking through that. Any questions on the wallet stuff before I go to the last item?
Can you just speak a little bit about frames and security? I had a situation earlier this week where someone from my community reached out thinking they had signed a transaction in a frame through the Warpcast feed that was actually a phishing link. Are you seeing reports of this, and how does that affect your thinking around connecting verified wallets versus having more of a one-time use wallet for apps?
We haven't heard that report, so if you want to share that with us, we'll take a look at it and see what we can, what the actual issue is. The zooming out, the high level model for security on frames is as follows. If you are taking actions within frames that are non-transaction things, you are typically signing Farcaster payloads, which to the best of my knowledge, can't really be used to do anything outside of Farcaster. So the worst thing you can do is probably trick somebody into logging in as the same user by giving them a frame and proxying that request to someone else. That would even be tricky because we do domain verification, but that's the worst case. The other mechanism for phishing is to actually give them a transaction, to actually say, hey, here's a link, go click this, execute this thing in your Rainbow or your MetaMask or your Coinbase wallet. And we have two levels of security there. One is we use transaction screening, so Blowfish blockade on our side to actually catch and identify transactions. So if we ever find something that is reported by them as malicious, we'll block it on our side. And most wallets also incorporate that on their side as well. So there's kind of two layers of defense for transaction-based wallets.
Okay,
And our
thanks.
long-term POV on security is, I think transaction scanning is actually pretty good. Both Horsefax and I have been impressed by how frequently it has caught bad actors and eliminated them pretty quickly. And so I think that that is likely to play out as the primary defense mechanism for wallets in the future. It's not going to be 100%. There's always going to be your 0.001 case where it doesn't catch something, but it seems to be pretty effective in our testing so far.
Cool. Yeah, I just forwarded you the link. Once again, this is a report. It's possible that she signed something somewhere else and mistakenly thought, attributed to Warpcast, but I'm just frankly surprised I haven't seen more of this. I thought it'd be a disaster when Frames first launched, and it's been not bad. So
Cool. Last thought on the other thing that Tony is thinking through this week is like, what is the long-term design for frames? And one of the problems we've heard from a lot of folks is with the existing frames is, hey, frames are slow. I want more buttons, more configurability. I want a bigger surface area to play with on frames. And the thing that we have realized is frames as they are currently architected are always going to have some fundamental delays because of the nature of how we proxy things, the nature of how that in-feed element works, and so on. And one thing that we are slowly warming up to is mini apps might be a better modality for executing a lot of frame-based actions. There might be a simple version where you have like one-shot frames where it's just, hey, I have a transaction, I just want to click this button and mint, and that could actually be done very, very simply. So that is like your simple one-click frame. And then there are multi-page apps where it's like, hey, I want to collect some input from you and do something, and then do something, and then finally give you a transaction to go execute. That might be better served in the context of a mini app. And the nice thing about a mini app, both from a UI and a performance perspective, is once we launch the browser or launch the little window that loads something from your page, we're now in your domain. And you can load stuff just as fast as you want from the user. And so the speed, the usability, the configurability, all of that stuff goes up really, really quickly. And we're getting increasing conviction that there might be something interesting there where we can double down on mini apps and kind of unify frames and mini apps and all these things to create really great experiences for minting, using Polymarket, and doing all of this stuff on chain. So doing a little bit more prototyping and research on that. And we kind of want to have a grand unifying theory of how frames, mini apps, composer actions, cast actions all tie together, and how we can simplify them so there's like one or two building blocks that you are thinking about creating that can be used in all of these different contexts. So again, expect some updates from us probably by the next dev call on how we're thinking about this. What data are you looking at that's giving you conviction re mini apps? I think it's basically what I said earlier is there's a lot of usage around frames. Like people really want to use frames, but there are limitations around the user experience. And if we step back and think about like how do we actually make frames super, super fast? The answer is load something directly from that domain. Like initially you load this sort of static thing that you've cached and you've pre-processed and you can say click this thing to start. But the moment you want the user to start interacting with the third-party developer thing, you have to proxy directly from their domain. And the easiest way to do that is just to load some piece of content from their domain, sandbox it nicely in a browser so there's no security risk, and let them like actually execute that. So I think the way we're thinking about this is people love frames. Their biggest complaints with frames is performance. Making them bigger and loading them from a domain will solve performance. And so we call them mini apps now, but you can kind of think of them as the next evolution of frames and where things are going. But frames are kind of the entry point in your feed, and this little browser pop-up window is what lets you actually interact with that. But the nice thing is you have the context of your Farcaster app. So if you have a wallet set up in your Farcaster app like Warpcast, you can actually proxy that transaction back and execute it in the context of that. And so you have all these nice features around that. Has there been anything seen on mini app performance on web versus native, performance being slower on mobile for this? I don't think we've done any benchmarks yet, but that is one of the things we're going to be looking into is like how fast does all of this stuff feel? And I think we're pretty confident it will feel faster than frames. Like for every click and every interaction is going to be better, but we do need to do some more profiling to understand how good it is. Cool. Any other questions on this? Lots of frames have buttons like share to warpcast, like Moshi in the end. How do you expect that to scale across clients? What if a user is interacting on a different client and doesn't have warpcast? We will probably, so the way we're thinking about mini apps, very rough strokes, is you kind of launch the user into this context in this other application, and there are going to be some ways for them to interact back with this app. So one mechanism is going to be send a transaction back to the app that you came from, and this should be a generic standard. So it's not just Warpcast, right? So no matter what app happens to be loading the frame or mini app, you can get the transaction back. And we will probably explore adding some set of Farcaster related actions, like, hey, I'd like to cast this, or I'd like this, or I'd like to follow this. So there might be some very narrow scoped set of social actions and transactions that you can send back or request that the user takes. We still need to prototype how all of this feels, but that feels like it can be done in a way that's generic enough that other applications can take care of it. Are the iframe requests somehow tunneled? Is there reasons why frames need to be proxied and mini apps do not? Uh, the reason for frame proxying right now, at least on the first this thing, is um, on the first load is actually privacy. So one of the things we do is we try to like prefetch the frame and proxy it to the user so that we're not directly loading stuff in your feed that could reveal your IP address. So the basic point being, I'm scrolling down the feed, I'm looking at a bunch of stuff. All of these frames are now getting my IP address and can actually see what I'm looking at. Versus, I think the modality that we want to go into is like, hey, when you tap something, launch the user into a browser into another domain, then you are directly fetching stuff from that domain. You're not going through any like Warpcast connection. You're not going out from the Warpcast client. You've literally just got like a Safari or Chrome instance that is loading directly from the other domain, and you're going to get performance that is equivalent to a web browser opening that app, which is pretty good. Okay, there's a few other questions. Were frames launched voluntary as dumber mini apps for security? I don't think we necessarily had this notion that they were like dumber versions of mini apps. I think the initial thinking was frames was how could we get something that had like a single unit in the feed that was actually didn't require you to open any additional context, didn't require you to break out of the UI context of being inside the feed. And I think the more we played around with it, the right design feels like actually loading something up and popping the user into another experience is what most developers and most users want for multi-page frames. And the notion that you can actually have like a slice and this application with buttons that works for some like very simple apps, but you quickly see apps like Bountycaster and Moxie and others like really pushing the edge of what this UI can do. And in a lot of cases, it's like most of these interesting apps would be far easier to use if you just popped up a browser window. Yeah, I think Chinmay's point is like basically spot on. Is like, hey, you have very simple frame, which is like, I just want to keep the user in the context of their feed, do a quick action, mint something low value, great, press the button. Anytime it's like I need to collect input from the user, I need a multi-step process, I need the user to tell me stuff. I think that a mini app is going to be much better, and so you're going to be able to choose which one of these you want to go down. Background mini apps. It's an interesting idea. We haven't thought about it. We're really focused on just like making sure the foreground is the right path. And once we do that, we'll try to think about whether stuff can run in the background. My intuition is that it will be complicated both from a performance and usability perspective. So it will likely take a lot of work to get that right. Cool. Moving down the list. So other big change announced this week is Gabriel, who's on the call, has been rolling out like more and more APIs for developers on the DirectCast side, particularly around read APIs. Gabriel, if you want to drop the link to the latest docs in chat, I think that would be useful for folks. And if there's any feedback you're looking for, anything, actually, if you want to step up and just chat through it, I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So I shared the link in the chat. I'm also going to share an invite link to the developers group chat, so we can some folks have been sending up feedbacks there. So in general, the please all take a look, but the main use case for these APIs is essentially like bots and automation. So we have APIs to create groups, to add members to the groups, to remove members from groups, to read and write messages and delete messages from groups. But only admins have access to them. Like, so it's not a like alt client, so anyone can create a client on top of DCs. That's not here yet. It's more for kind of like bot type experiences or automation in certain ways. So please take a look at the document and give me any feedback you might have.
Cool. And just to recap on DCs, the strategy that we talked about last time, or the broader theme that we are building towards, is we want to make the DCs as programmable as possible. So if you have automations where it's like, hey, I want everyone who owns my token on chain to join the group, great. Now there's an API where you can go pull something from the blockchain, pull this API, and configure it exactly how you want. Or if you even want like very specific sub rules, like I want people who hold this section of my 1120, but not this section, you have a lot of customizability to do that. I think it's also going to be cool to see. There are a bunch of interesting LLM experiments on Farcaster, like Ask Gina from Sid and others. I think it's going to be interesting to see what people start building once they actually have direct access to DCs. Would be very interesting to see people build support bots or other things where you could actually have a back and forth interaction with the user and help them solve problems. And so please give us feedback on these APIs. This is the big arc that we're focused on for October and November, is making sure that DCs and group chats are as programmable and usable as possible from an API perspective. Any questions on this before we move on? All right, reducing sign-up costs. So the thing we talked about last time is we are focused on reducing sign-up costs. Last week, we talked about how the costs had gone down to $2. And the big focus for us to take the cost down to $1 is to continue improving the spam model and make sure that we are very good at catching spammy accounts and labeling them, and that we are making sure the experience is good for everyone using the feed in the application. And the better and better we get at this, the more aggressive we can get about letting lots and lots of users in at lower cost. And that's just going to be a compounding force for us. The things we're exploring this week are one, we're working on this last week. We're getting a little closer, but we're using graph-based detection with like this fraud R-based model that identifies spammy accounts. You may have seen some of these that join the network and then follow like 1,000 people, and do this in bulk where there's a bunch of these accounts that all join at the same time, or like a bunch of posts or recast a bunch of stuff. There's all these little vectors where they try to interact with and get other people to notice them. The second dimension is testing verifications for spam resist prevention and Sybil resistance. You've seen us push out Twitter verifications where we now have 13,000 connected Twitter accounts, and we can start doing data analysis to see, hey, if you connect a Twitter account and it has a certain account age or a certain number of followers, is that actually a good signal where we can say, okay, on day one, you're actually a real user. Don't worry about this, and sort of pass them on. And we are probably going to experiment with other signals as well, TBD, but you can imagine other socials, GitHubs, other accounts like that, and test and see which of these are actually going to be most helpful for resistance, and how can we help users set all this stuff up so that they can get verified. And then related to that, we've actually finalized the spec for social attestations. So when Warpcast does a Twitter verification or authentication, we actually want to publish that to the protocol so that other apps are able to do this, which is if you trust Warpcast, that Warpcast has done the verification correctly, here's a bit of data showing you which account that this user has on the protocol. And Cassie has been working on this spec. Today is the last call for feedback. We're going to ship this unless we hear any concerns about this architecture, but it is a very, very simple design where you have one data type for Twitter, one data type for GitHub, which are the two things we're probably going to experiment with soon. And you can just push an attestation as an application, and every attestation both says, hey, this is Alice's X account or Twitter account, and this is the application that claimed, or this is the FID or Farcaster ID of the application that claims to have verified Alice's account. So you can choose whether or not to trust that based on whether or not you trust that FID, and do this. And the long term, I think we're not quite there yet in terms of the technology, but the long term is being able to use something like ZKTLS or so on to have like an actual proof that you did the OAuth and that you did this. So it's actually like totally verifiable. But in the short term, we're going with the attestation based model where it's I trust this FID, Warpcast FID, and I trust that Warpcast has validated that Alice has at Alice on Twitter. Okay, any questions or feedback on this? If not, Cassie's actually going to hit the ship button on this later today, and we're going to publish all this data out to the protocol, and this is going to be available to other apps on hubs. I'm sure Naynar will make this available over APIs at some point in the near future as well. Let me look through the chat to see if there's any comments. Okay. Oh, already available on APIs. Yes, actually, I should call this out. The Twitter data is available through Warpcast APIs today, just not on the hubs, but we are moving it to hubs. Naynar also makes it available through their own APIs. We will eventually shut down the Warpcast API because it's kind of redundant. You can just get it from the hubs, but we'll keep both of them running for a few weeks at least until Naynar and all consumers of the Warpcast API have moved over to reading the hub API. Thanks, Horsefax, for sharing that link. By the way, for anyone, oops, let me pull up our doc. For anyone who was following along with the meeting, the full meeting notes are here, and you can kind of find all the links and click through stuff. Cool. Moving on to hubs, this is going to be our last discussion items for today. So one thing we talked about last time was we had a memory leak issue that was causing hubs to occasionally fail and causing some messages to get backed up. Looks like a very deep, gnarly issue in Node/V8. We managed to just work around it by changing how some of the lower level message processing gets done. If you're interested, there's like a ticket and a PR that talks through all of this stuff. But the good news is hubs are stable again, and we think we've worked around this issue and we're fine for now. Two other things that we should talk about. Let me actually go through the smaller items first and then get to Snapchain. So one thing that shipped this week, actually yesterday night, was location on user profile. So Aditi and the team has been working on this. we now have Warpcast has collected location public locations for a while, where you can set your public location on your profile, make it visible to everyone else, send people notifications when you get into the area, et cetera, et cetera. And we've now changed it so that this data lives on hubs, and Warpcast is actively publishing this data to hubs. So as of yesterday, all of this location data is available. You can build APIs, you can pull this data, use it. It's available in a lat long 2 decimal places format, which I think for most use cases has actually worked pretty well. The second feature that we talked about was location on casts. And I think Christopher and I went back and Aditi went back and forth on this last week. I think there's still some ambiguity around how we want to use this, whether locations should have like, you know, building level precision where you're able to use it like Foursquare and say like at this cast, I'm checking into this bakery, or whether it's, regional level where you're talking about like Brooklyn, or whether it's city level like New York, or whether it should have more flexibility. So there's more nuance around how we want to treat this, how we want to use descriptions, which in profiles, I think it was a lot simpler. You typically want to find people who are in like your broader like area, but casts are slightly different. And so we're going to think a little bit more about what the right design here is. Christopher, anything you wanted to add on that?
Yeah, I think it's also just like too early to be experimenting with the cast component pieces, and I think that we need to play around a little bit with Uno first to understand where location makes sense and how other people consume it on other people's platforms first. So I think it's a client level enablement. It's not a frame or in the feed enablement, which I think is a different weight. But location on profiles is fantastic, and I think that serves everybody equally.
Cool. Okay. Getting back to SnapChain, Sanjay and the team have been making a lot of progress digging into the details of SnapChain. So we have a new design doc that's out here. I'll share the link in chat. And we're getting pretty close to what we think is a final design. Our focus is to actually get this to a point where we are locked down on the design this week, and then we can actually start implementation, like I'll call it early prototyping or implementation next week. And the aggressive schedule is sometime early next year, Jan or Feb, we actually have the whole network migrated and moved over to using SnapChain. And to recap for folks who are just joining us this week, the main goal behind SnapChain was to solve a lot of the sync issues that we're dealing with the current Farcaster hub architecture, where because of the way CRDTs work, there is some long tail of messages that end up getting delayed for hours or days. And this is just an intrinsic problem that is going to get worse as we add more and more nodes to the network. And the appendix here has, if you can actually go to appendix D down here, or C, and it kind of talks through why sync is hard. There's a bunch of very specific reasons why we're not going to be able to overcome it using CRDTs. And at a high level, what SnapChain is going to do is it's going to bring a blockchain-like architecture where we are going to group like all of a user's transactions or actions into blocks and sync them. And it is very easy to sync blockchains because if you're out of sync, you're like, what block do I have? What block do you have? And you can catch up pretty quickly. So the sync mechanism becomes a lot simpler. The main difference between SnapChain and a blockchain is we take transactions and make them super narrow. So rather than being able to do like arbitrary logic like you can with Ethereum, a transaction is a very narrow social action. You can either post something, you can delete a post, you can like something, you can delete a like. And so there's a few well-defined operations that only operate within the context of an account. And the nice thing about that is we can do a lot of stuff that your traditional blockchains can't. We can shard very, very easily. We can prune and clean up older data. So these are going to be a lot more efficient at how many transactions per second they can do, and a lot more efficient at how much data needs to be stored per transaction that is performed on the network. So those are the main benefits of SnapChain. Is it's going to make all of these sync problems between apps go away, and it's going to make casts be a lot faster. But as we've gotten more into the design, there's a couple of other really cool things that have come up, which is one, we can actually go back. We used to have this a really long time ago, but we can actually go back to a model now where signers or app keys are on SnapChain and not on the blockchain, which means adding applications becomes free. And so it becomes much easier to add and connect different applications. And even removing them is free. And as a nice side benefit, we might also be able to find a design where when you remove an app, you don't actually have to delete all of the data that that app produced. You can actually sort of pause it and say, I use this app from October 1st to October 12th. All of the casts I made in that time, I want frozen, but I don't want this app to be able to do anything new. And so it simplifies a lot more stuff around how users have to think about applications and things like that. So there's a bunch of like nice user benefits that we're also going to get. The biggest ask for this group is, I think, if you are interested in distributed systems, or even if you're just curious about how Snapchain works, please take a look at this doc and send us feedback. We're trying to make this doc as approachable and as understandable as possible. And so we want to make this easy for people who have, a basic understanding of how these systems work to be able to grasp this and to be able to give us good feedback on this. And that's the most useful thing you can do this week. If you are very deeply familiar with consensus systems, Tendermint, Rust, any of those things, and you want to go super deep on any of the architectural things, again, we'd love to collect feedback. We want to make sure this design is really battle tested, and we're reaching out to a bunch of folks in different research groups to make sure that there are no gaps in this design before we start implementation. All right, any questions on Snapchain or anything else? Cool. Last item on our priority list from last week was sign in with Farcaster. The priorities have not changed. We still want support on web and multi-client support, but a lot of the design here is sort of blocked on what we end up doing with the wallet decision, because that will inform how signatures are produced. So that sort of goes back up to this item up here. So I expect we won't make much progress on this until we are able to figure out a path forward here, and then we can work backwards into what we're doing with sign in with Farcaster. All right, that brings us to the end of our meeting today. I know we have a few more minutes. If anyone has questions that we haven't touched on or things they want to bring up, now is the last call for them. There's a question on rich media and DCs, images, videos. I think images and videos we want to do. We will most likely, once we are done with this API arc, we will explore what videos and DCs and other things looks like. Markdown probably a little further down the roadmap. I think there's actually a decent amount of nuance to getting something like Markdown put in, and most people kind of work around it with using, gists or other things that you can link to. But there might be like a composer action or something where you can easily like load up a code snippet and have it render nicely, even if it's hosted elsewhere. Is LinkedIn a viable option for, I'm assuming that's attestations? Yes, I think there's a whole bunch of things we want to go explore, and we'll probably do them in sequence. The way we're going to do them is, one, test them out in Warpcast, see if it's actually a useful signal. If it's a useful signal, then extend the spec to support that social verification, and try to publish it. And I think the set of obvious things we will explore are other socials, so LinkedIn, potentially Instagram and others if they still have an open API. GitHub, which I think is very valuable for even though it's going to be a lot narrower and fewer people have it, it's going to be valuable for people who want to target developers or find other developers. And I think the other idea that has been proposed that we are also considering is, can you validate a domain? Like, can you verify that you have an email address at xyz.com, which sort of implicitly proves that you either work at xyz.com or you're affiliated with them. And that's another interesting signal that you can plug in to verifications and to help people connect with each other. So we will probably explore all of those things over the next few weeks and months. Cool. All right. Well, if that's all we've got, then we can wrap here today, folks. Thanks everyone for making it. We have one last question. Can I use socket.io in a Farcaster social app? I'm actually not familiar with that, but I'll take a look at it offline and give you a response to that. So cool. Thanks everyone for coming today. We're going to wrap here and see you all 2 weeks from now.